You think you're done with three?
No, well, potentially. No, I said it's the funnest thing I've done. Out of everything I've
Oh,
done, having
funnest thing you've
kids
done.
is by far the best.
Yeah. Yeah. It gives I've talked to other men about this, and I feel like a man can't fully mature until he has had kids. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it opens up a whole other spectrum of life. I mean, as soon as I had my first kid, I looked back at all the guys that I had known over the years in the military and outside of the military that had kids, and it puts them in a whole different light.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it obviously shifts your priorities, but I don't know. It just makes you reevaluate priorities, reevaluate who you are as a man, who you want to be. Now you've got people looking at you, and
Yeah.
not people you can just shrug off and say their opinion doesn't matter, and you're going to do your own thing. Now you've actually got responsibility to try and set the example for some people. So it
Hmm.
makes a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely does. I think what's really cool about that is you don't hear of a ton of successful marriages coming out of kind of the military environment. I mean, they're definitely out there. Don't get me wrong, but not a lot of them, right? And
Yep.
for you to have your high school sweetheart and you guys make that work is incredible. What would you attribute that to?
A bunch of things. So you're right. So when I deployed to Afghanistan, out of the platoon that I deployed with, there's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of like 10 to 15 that were married
Mhm.
going into that deployment. If I look back at that group of guys now, I know of two of those guys that are still married, and one of them divorced his wife, and then they got remarried a year later. So
Well, good. They
uh,
figured that out at least.
they figured that out. So you're right. So the divorce rate's astronomical in the military, and there's a bunch of different reasons for that. I'd say our success has been a combination of things. So one, we dated for 6 years before we got married, so we
Mhm.
had that momentum going into it. I think one
Yeah.
times a lot of times what happens in the military is a very intense experience. A lot of experience crammed into a very short amount of time, so it forces a lot of growth. That adversity creates a lot of growth in the service member, and it creates that growth, but your spouse isn't necessarily on that same track,
Yeah.
right? They're moving at a normal person's pace, and so that gap that widens um, between the individuals can get pretty large. And then on top of that, there's the time away. You've got deployments, you've got training cycles, you've got all of that. That creates a gap.
Hmm.
Um, for us, we had that momentum going into it. We were only an hour and a half from our hometown, so my wife had family relatively close by.
Oh, that's helpful.
Um, and the fact that she's just a really strong, good individual on top of that, and then even a lot of the struggles for people marriage wise in the military is once they get out, right? It's easy to kind of push a lot of issues down while you're in, kind of grit through, and then they all
Yeah.
kind of come to the surface when you get out. So I'm not going to say things were all roses the entire time.
Sure.
We definitely had our hardships, but I'd say we're at a point now where we're stronger than we've ever been.
Yeah.
And while that's perseverance, got to give credit to God for a lot of it. And then good old fashioned counseling. Highly
Yeah.
recommend that to just about everybody. Even better to get involved with that before
Hmm.
issues pop up.
Dude, I feel you. That is something my wife and I have. I mean, we continuously go. Not.
Yeah,
Uh, we went through a hard time last year. I've talked about this a few times on the podcast, or a couple of years ago, not last year. And we still just like every now and then pop in once a quarter. Just to sit down and chat through anything. And a lot of times it's, well, what's going on? I'm like, nothing. Everything's good. But then you start talking and things come up, and it's like, oh,
yeah,
actually, how do you figure this out? And it's very much understanding how your partner's brain works, right? And also looking at it as being a team. Um,
yeah,
I think the hardest thing for my wife is when I was early on in my career, I was plowing ahead and just trying to strive to be as great as I could be, right? And I kind of left her behind in the dust, and she was like, I don't want to just be left behind. I want to be by your side, be your teammate. And as soon as I started including her on more, she was really appreciative of that. And even though we kind of had, separate careers for a little while, it ended up coming to be where now, she homeschools the kids, she runs the home front, and I'm able to do what I love every day because of that. Um, but that's that team aspect of it.
Yeah. And I don't know if you're like me, but for a long time I felt like I was the guy, I was the logical one. I was
Hmm.
right. If there was a referee standing in the corner for these arguments, guaranteed they're going to be on my side in all of these situations, right? But then you get that third party in the room,
Uh-huh.
that unbiased third party, and they just have to poke like a couple holes in your logic, and then
Yeah.
you're put in a position where like, oh wait, crap,
Yeah.
I'm actually wrong here.
They're
I've
able
been wrong
to,
on this for a long time.
yeah, they're able to a lot of times verbalize it to you in a way that your wife is trying to, but it just
Yeah,
doesn't get through. And then they verbalize it to you a certain way, and you're like, oh, now I see where she was coming from, you know? And it takes
yeah,
that third party. It's a great thing to, even continuously do, but it's especially early on in marriage. So
yeah, yeah. I
how
wish we had
old?
gone a lot earlier than we did.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Even for us, how old were you when you guys feel like you really things clicked? You figured things out. You like maybe not figured things out, but
Yeah.
you were on the same page.
Um, I mean, it's gone through peaks and valleys. So there were times when I think we thought we clicked.
Hmm.
Um, but I'd say probably about 2 years ago or so
Really?
is really when it
Yeah.
it really started clicking, or really getting on its not so much peaks and valleys, but more just kind of a steady incline. Was
Consistent.
probably
Yeah.
about 2 years ago.
That's awesome, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
that it takes a long time. I feel like we're still getting there, personally. After we went through a separation, what was that? I think it was 2020, 21, something like that. Luckily it was like
Hmm.
only lasted for about 3, 4 months. But once we went through that, it was like things started clicking, and then
Yeah.
yeah, as you said, it was like that was when things kind of started to consistently, we'd have a few dips here and there again, and it's never going to be a perfectly consistent growth, but it started more consistently going uphill.
Yeah, and we had something similar. I was staying at my sister's house for I don't even know how long it was, a month or two or something like that. Maybe it was just a few weeks. And it was off and on. We are trying to figure stuff out, but you kind of get to that point. And I don't know if it's necessarily rock bottom, but you get to the point where like, all right, like now's the time to decide. Like, are
Yeah.
you really all in? You said you were all in. Are you
Hmm.
really all in, or are you going to bail?
It's so
And
funny you mentioned that. Yeah.
yeah, as soon as I mean, you both come to that conclusion a second time, after your marriage, really when you're
Hmm.
put to the test, I think that's when you can really put a lot more faith in their, the goodwill they're putting towards making things work, making,
Hmm.
the marriage you want it to be.
Yeah. No, I mean, what's funny about that is when we started going back to counseling again, um, our counselor, he was like, "It sounds like you both, are half-assing this. It sounds like you both are 1 foot in, 1 foot out." He's like, "Are you going to make a decision to figure this out or not?" And we both looked at each other and it was like, "Okay, we're in." And that was the moment that things started changing, right?
Yeah.
So it's funny that you mentioned that because it's a similar thing I think across the board.
Yeah, and I think one really valuable thing for me during that time was just talking to people. I think a
Hmm.
lot of times people go through something like that and they internalize it, or they don't seek guidance or advice from other people, even outside of counseling, just
Yeah.
other people you respect in your life. And um, so I talked to a handful of people about that, and you'll talk to people that I never trusted anyone, because you talk to
Mhm.
someone who went through a rough time and they stuck it out. And so, yeah, it was the best thing that ever happened.
Yeah.
Glad I stuck it out. And then you hear somebody got divorced and they'll tell you the exact same thing. Best thing I ever did was get divorced. But you always wonder in the back of your mind, are they just validating
Yeah.
their decision?
Yeah.
Right? Would they tell you if they regretted it? But I had one guy who got divorced and told me, he was like, worst mistake I ever made. He was
Wow.
like, and he's like, I'm happily remarried now and everything, but if I had to go it to do over again, it destroyed my kids' lives. It had all these negative impacts. I would have done it differently. And his headspace, he had a lot of the same, uh, thought processes that I did, and he was able
Mhm.
to just give me honest advice, and it's super valuable advice. And I can, for whatever it's worth, I'm super glad made the decision I did, and we went the route we went. And you might, somebody listening might say that I'm biased based on my decision, but I
Sure.
promise you, I'm not.
It's, if you can, despite or other than certain scenarios, right? Abuse, um,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
infidelity, things like that. Y By making the decision to make it like, to stick it out and figure things out, you can never go wrong with that.
Yeah.
you know. Yeah, and same thing. Like I've had people that had been divorced, you know, and talked to them about it. And luckily I had good men around me that, you know, all would say like, this isn't the best route to go.
Yeah.
Even if that was the route they ended up going, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree. I'm not saying that it's never the right answer, but for
right.
my situation, it
Hmm.
was not the right answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned faith in God being really helpful for that
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Elaborate on that some more.
Yeah. So I'm a Christian, been a, Christian since I was a kid. Um, and it's kind of like the same thing, that I said about marriage. You can
Hmm.
make the commitment early on. Um, but for me, this was probably the biggest test. It
Yeah.
wasn't anything else in life. It wasn't, I was getting shot up in Afghanistan, all that stuff. That stuff didn't really test my faith.
Hmm.
This, when, you want to quit, you want to throw in the towel, or you've got thoughts in that direction at least. But the Bible says something different.
Hmm.
Having to actually, again, make a decision that's going to impact your life dramatically, one way or the other, whichever way you decide, and having
Yeah.
to make the conscious decision to choose, the path of faith versus what your gut, your mind, whatever is telling you to do.
Hmm.
And so for me, it kind of reignited, so I made that choice, and it wasn't just me. My wife made that choice as well.
Yeah.
She would tell you this brought her much closer to God as well. But for me, it kind of reignited a desire to dive in deeper. Like, if I really am like making this giant commitment, I should be taking it more seriously. Like,
Yeah.
I should be learning everything I can about this.
Hmm.
So on that, for all the heartache, that time period caused, definitely some silver linings out
Yeah.
of it.
No doubt. I would completely agree. It definitely it isn't ever something I'd want to go through again, but it's something for me that I had to go through and that my wife had to go through to get to the point we're at now. And so it was
Yeah.
all